un verdadero ejemplo mundial. Rusia y China condenan las acciones de Irán ante la ONU. Dicen no podemos permitir que lo que está haciendo Estados Unidos continúe. La ONU, este organismo de las Naciones Unidas, debería plantarle cara a Estados Unidos. Se supone que ese es su trabajo, se supone. Pero bueno, hemos visto que definitivamente a la ONU no le interesa lo que pase realmente a nivel mundial, siempre y cuando Estados Unidos esté bien. Si Estados Unidos no hace berrinche, entonces obviamente la ONU está muy bien. Este es el mensaje que da el representante de China en la ONU ante la situación que se está llevando a cabo en estos momentos por el tema de la guerra directa entre Irán y Estados Unidos. Porque Israel logró su cometido, logró involucrar a Estados Unidos en este conflicto.
Yesterday, the United States conducted strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. China strongly condemns the U.S. attacks on Iran and the bombing of nuclear facilities under the safeguards of the IAEA. The actions of the United States seriously violate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, as well as Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. It has exacerbated tensions in the Middle East and dealt a heavy blow to the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. The international community must uphold justice and make concrete efforts to cool down the situation and restore peace and stability. In this connection, I wish to put forward 4 appeals. First, we call for an immediate ceasefire and ending the hostilities. In the context of the abrupt escalation of tensions in the Middle East, China is deeply concerned about the risk of the situation getting out of control. The parties to the conflict, Israel in particular, should reach an immediate ceasefire to prevent a spiraling escalation and to resolutely avoid the spillover of the war. The parties concerned should abide by international law, curb the impulse to use force, and avoid exacerbating conflicts and adding fuel to the fire. Second, we call for effective protection of civilians. The ultimate victims of all conflicts are the innocent people. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian casualties caused by the conflict. Civilians and civilian facilities must not become targets of military operations. And the bottom line of international humanitarian law must not be breached. Parties to the conflict should place the interests and well-being of the people of the countries in the region above everything else, and make every effort to avoid harm to innocent civilians and refrain from attacking civilian facilities. Third, we call for commitment to dialogue and negotiation. Peace in the Middle East cannot be achieved by the use of force. Dialogue and negotiation are the fundamental way out. At present, diplomatic means to address the Iranian nuclear issue haven't been exhausted, and there's still hope for a peaceful solution. Parties should stay firmly committed to the political settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue and work to bring it back onto the track of a political solution through dialogue and negotiation, with a view to reaching an agreement acceptable to all parties. Fourth, we call for swift actions by the Security Council. The Security Council has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and cannot stand idly by in the face of a major crisis. Russia, China, and Pakistan have proposed a draft resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the protection of civilians, respect for international law, and engaging in dialogue and negotiation. We hope that Council members can demonstrate their strong sense of responsibility by jointly supporting the draft resolution to enable the Security Council to fulfill its responsibilities for the maintenance of international peace and security. China stands ready to work with the international community to foster synergy, uphold justice, and make unremitting efforts to restore peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now...
Ese es el mensaje de China ante la ONU. Y es muy simple. Vamos a tratar de realmente hacer nuestro trabajo. La ONU debería hacer su trabajo, condenar las acciones de Estados Unidos. ¿Qué estamos haciendo aquí? ¿Qué estamos haciendo aquí? Si en realidad no nos importa lo que haga o deje de hacer Estados Unidos. Si en realidad no estamos dispuestos a enfrentarnos a Estados Unidos. También el representante de Rusia ante la ONU dio un mensaje. Un mensaje largo, sí, vamos a tratar de resumirlo, pero sobre todo, exhibió la situación. También tienes que darte cuenta del mensaje, del entorno, de la ONU. Los representantes están agarrando su móvil, están viendo los mensajes, están en todo menos tratando de encontrar una solución a esta situación entre Irán y Estados Unidos.
We're grateful to the Presidency of Guyana for swiftly convening today's meeting of the UN Security Council, linked to the acutely dangerous development we've seen in the Middle East, developments which have been further exacerbated by the overnight US strikes on Iranian sites. We'd like to thank the UNSG for his keynote address, as well as to ASG Yencha and DG Grossi for their briefings. Russia condemns in the most decisive terms the irresponsible, dangerous, and provocative actions committed by the USA against the Islamic Republic of Iran, a sovereign member state of the United Nations. As we know, in the early hours on the 22nd of June, the US Air Force, in full cooperation and coordination with the Israeli Air Force, an air force which for over a week, in violation of the basic principles of international law, has been conducting massive strikes on Iranian infrastructure and sites, they together launched an unprovoked missile and bomb attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, sites under IAEA safeguards, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. In so doing, Washington yet again demonstrated its complete contempt for the position of the international community. Washington reasserted that to further the interests of its Israeli ally, it's prepared not only to turn a blind eye to the killings of tens of thousands of Palestinian women, children, and older persons, but also to gamble with the safety and well-being of humanity as a whole. Through their actions, the US has opened a Pandora's box. No one knows what new catastrophes and suffering it will bring. In the last 10 days, we heard 3 briefings from the IAEA DG, Mr. Rafael Grossi. He cautioned that strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure could have absolutely unpredictable repercussions, as well as that they pose a major threat to both the nuclear safety and security, not only in Iran, but also in the region and the world. Yet Washington is completely unconcerned. It's unconcerned by either the radiological consequences nor the threat to the lives and health of a huge number of people, civilians including women and children, in the region and beyond. Washington, much like West Jerusalem, sees itself as the highest judge in the land, vested with the right to mete out justice as it sees fit. Thus, the US has confirmed that in order to safeguard their global hegemony, it's prepared to commit any crimes, any violations of international law. Let me remind you that no one gave the US the authority to act in such a way. We insistently offered our US colleagues our mediation services so as to find a peaceful, mutually agreeable solution surrounding the Iranian nuclear program. Yet our US colleagues clearly not interested in diplomacy today. Responsibility for this falls squarely on the shoulders of the US leadership, especially given that it is the US leadership that not only publicly acknowledged its responsibility for these actions, but actually flaunted it, demonstrating wholesale disregard for the norms of international law and the UN Charter, as well as Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 487 and Resolution 2231, as well as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. Madam President, just 2 days ago, here in this very chamber, we heard from many delegations, including the closest allies of the US. They called for a de-escalation and for the settlement of differences around the negotiating table. Yet our US colleagues yet again ignored this position, the position of the entire international community, following Israel's lead, instead of checking Israel, instead of forcing it to halt the spiral of escalation. Today, we once again will be hearing from the US representative. We'll be hearing cynical statements about readiness to return to the negotiations table, as if there were no strikes using heavy payload bombs on Iran. Clearly, this is being done to hypercritically subsequently portray Tehran as the party that spoiled the negotiations process, the party that's supposedly undermining stability in the Middle East. Yet we believe that none of our sensible colleagues in the international community will believe our US colleagues anymore, much like they won't believe their attempts to convince the Security Council that Iran was trying to acquire nuclear weapons. Let me remind you that back in March, high-ranking US intelligence officials said that the US does not have information about Tehran's attempts to develop military nuclear capabilities. I imagine that many are getting a nagging sense of déjà vu today. Let me remind you that back in 2003, in this very chamber, the US Secretary of State Colin Powell waved around a test tube, justifying Washington's plans to invade the territory of another sovereign state, only to having waged decades of chaos onto its people to not find any WMDs there. Today's situation is no different in substance to the one we saw in 2003. Again, we're being asked to believe the US's fairy tales to once again inflict suffering on millions of people living in the Middle East. This cements our conviction that history has taught our US colleagues nothing.
Ese es realmente el mensaje. ¿Quieren que creamos otra vez que Estados Unidos está invadiendo otro país soberano solo porque él cree que tiene armas nucleares o que en algún momento las va a tener o que representan un riesgo para la seguridad nacional? No somos tontos, señoras y señores, no somos tontos. Sabemos lo que está haciendo Estados Unidos. Necesita petróleo, necesita gas, necesita oro, necesita los recursos de otra nación de Oriente Medio. Nada más. Nada más. Hipócritamente hablando, todos los miembros de la ONU, los del Consejo de Seguridad de la ONU, están allí escuchándose mutuamente, uno lo apoya, uno está en contra. Al final van a hacer lo que quiera hacer Estados Unidos. Si este video te gustó, no olvides darle like y compartir y suscribirte. Nos vemos la próxima.